Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the House of Overthinking. With the movie Wicked coming out in about a week and a half, it's a very good time to be an Oz fan, which means it's a very good time to be me because I have loved Oz all my life. When I was 4 years old, my mother took me to see The Wizard of Oz at the cinema. It was my first movie and it blew my little 4-year-old mind. From that point on, I was obsessed with Oz, which is so unusual for a little gay boy. But anyway, I discovered soon that there was, beyond the musical with the fantastic songs, was also a series of books by the author All Frank Baum, and that was when I discovered this. And then, of course, there was The Land of Oz, and Ozma of Oz, and Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. It was incredibly exciting to learn that there were more books, 14 in total. And I collected them in a paperback series, gave them to my niece afterwards. Now I just have a selected few hardcovers. And of course, then there was Return to Oz, which came out in the mid-80s when I was still a little boy, just maybe a year or two after that. And Return to Oz is very beloved amongst Oz fans because it captures the tone and the spirit of the books almost more closely than any other adaptation we've had. I also bought things like this when I was young, through which I learned huge amounts about the world of Oz and everything that went into its making. That's another story for another time. But at any rate, in my adulthood, my love of Oz was fueled by a new generation of Oz storytelling in the form of Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. This is one of the hardcover editions, of course, that was released earlier on. And after, I think, 8 years of this being out, this was published in 1995, if I recall correctly. In about 2003, the musical Wicked came out. And a couple of years after that, I went to see it on Broadway. I would be wearing the t-shirt and the hoodie that I bought at the time, but they have fallen apart from having worn them about 1 million times each. And Wicked is one of the most enduring musicals on Broadway for an extremely good reason. And then what fan could resist Wicked the Grimmery, the ultimate fan's coffee book if you love... Oh, a whole bunch of oak leaves just fell out of it. That's extremely unsurprising considering what I'm like. Anyway, I won't open it any further should an entire forest fall out. But this is Wicked the Grimmery, an absolutely stunning coffee table book. And I have all sorts of other things, from the Oz comics, from Caliber, to things you've never even heard about, like Paradox in Oz. There have been graphic novels which I've bought and passed on, so many different Oz things that have entered my collection. Wicked is like the adultification of your favorite childhood book, and it was an incredible thrill to see politics and religion and mature adult themes be introduced to a world that has traditionally been associated with very pure and childlike content. The book is certainly for mature teenagers and up. There is adult language in it, there are adult situations, adult content. It's not, it's not a Mills and Boon novel, but I certainly would have been a bit shocked by some of it as a sheltered teenager. One of the things that Gregory Maguire really makes a strong deal of in the book is this tension between talking animals and the establishment. And he uses it as a metaphor for racism, segregation, and that's all very well and good. However, he doesn't continue that theme particularly well in the second book, Son of a Witch. This is a signed first edition. It's a strange situation to be in, describing a sequel that doesn't actually have any of the characters that were in the story before it. It features, as you may guess from the title, the son of Elphaba. There's a bit of a spoiler for you, but anyway, it's hard to avoid that one. Given that it's about her son as an adult, it's set quite a few years afterwards, so it's impossible for things to be exactly like they were back during the days of the Wicked story. And I liked Son of a Witch, but I didn't love it the way that I'd loved Wicked. And then along came the third book, A Lion Among Men, which I didn't even keep in my possession. It was that bad. Son of a Witch is enjoyable, at least. It takes you back into the world that you know. It doesn't really scratch the itch the way you wanted it to, largely because the author was not faithful to the themes he'd established in Wicked. One of the main stories that I was really excited about was this prophecy of Lurleen. In the original Oz books, there's a bit of debate as to where Ozma comes from. Originally, she was described as the daughter of a king who was kidnapped by the wizard and raised in secret by a witch in the form of a girl. And then in a later retcon, she was turned into this fairy princess who was just dropped off by the fairy queen Lurleen. And so Wicked addressed the fact that there were these conflicting stories about who Ozma was, and I thought, ooh, they're going to have the return of Ozma coming up, and it'll be tied into the mythology of Lurleen, and it all promised to be very exciting. However, the war in Iraq happened well, I don't remember the exact year, but you remember that very unfortunate time in the early 2000s when the United States invaded Iraq. Many Americans were incensed about this. Gregory Maguire was among them, and I'm not commenting on whether that was a right or wrong feeling to have, but it did somewhat commandeer the direction of Son of a Witch. And instead of telling a story about the return of Ozma and Lurleen, he ended up telling an anti-war story. He kind of took the narrative by the horns and turned it in a different direction. And I understand why he wanted to do that. I understand the messages he wanted to tell, but it just didn't continue in the same vein as the book before it, and therefore it didn't succeed as well as it could have. I will not deign to discuss A Lion Among Men, except to say that if you're going to read the series, you can skip that novel. It's about two sea characters. The lion, who has barely featured in anything and is not a particularly pleasant character to read, and Mother Yackle, who is also not particularly charismatic. It's really difficult to understand why Maguire chose those two people. Mother Yackle is significant to the mythology of the books, but in a way that's not really that exciting to find out, so I don't really know what he was thinking. But anyway, the fourth book, Out of Oz. This was somewhat of a redemption. It features the granddaughter of Elphaba. Her name is Rain. She also has green skin. And she carries on the spirit of Elphaba in a way. It's a bit more satisfying to read about her because she almost feels like a childhood version of Elphaba. And this one really does pay a greater homage to the Oz books than the middle two in the series. It features Dorothy returning to Oz and arriving in Oz in a way that fans of the Oz books might remember from the fourth book in the series. It features other characters that people may remember, like Mombi, and it was quite a thrill to see them in the book. But still, there's something about Maguire. He manages to suck the magic out of fantasy. I don't quite know how he does it, but he just manages to drain the colour out of the Technicolor. There was a scene near the end of this book, I won't tell you what it is, but I was very excited about seeing it happen. And when it took place, it kind of happened almost off screen, and I went, wait, what? Did that thing that I've been waiting for just happen? And it was really? It was incredibly unsatisfying. So this is worth reading. If you're going to read the books, read the first, read the second, skip the third, just read a summary online, learn about what happens at the end, and then read the fourth book. But we then move on to the question, should you read the books before you watch the musical? Well, it's a strange relationship to be in because we start off with books that get told in a revisionist manner in another book form, which gets adapted into a musical, which is now being adapted into a film. So it's a very interesting evolution that's taken place. The musical is very much like the Disney version of Wicked the book, which, as I said, is full of politics and philosophy and religion and steamy adultness that you will not find in any Narnia book. And the stage show cleans up a lot of that. They made it family friendly. So the musical is the family friendly version of the book. And you will find much of the narrative of the musical is in the book, but it's a bit less fantastical. It's a lot more serious. You don't have the humor, you don't have the charm of all the magic. And I think that you should wait until after watching the movie before reading the books. Here's my rationale. So many times I've heard people say before a movie comes out, I've got to read the book first, I've got to read the book first. And I would ask them, why? Why do you have to read the book first? And they would say, well, because, I don't want the movie to ruin the book. And I would ask them, which one do you think is going to be better, the book or the movie? And they would inevitably say, the book. And I would ask them, well, if you know the book is going to be better than the movie, why are you trying to ruin the movie before you go and see it? And then they would go, why am I doing it in that order? And I really think in most cases, you should start off with the movie, start off with the series, the adaptation, whatever that is. Start off with the adaptation, because if the book is superior, you want to then move on to the thing that's better, right? You don't want to start off reading this book, falling in love with it, and then watching a subpar adaptation that leaves you feeling really unhappy about it. If you'd done it the other way around, you could have seen the movie, enjoyed it at face value, just taken it for what it was, and then discovered a book that was deeper and richer and far more interesting than the movie. It's a better way around to do it. If you start off with the book and then ruin the movie, it's like starting off with dessert and then moving on to spinach. I mean, I'm not hating on spinach, but you don't eat it after ice cream, right? You've got to do things in the right order if you want to enjoy them properly. And generally, you go savory, then sweet. So save the best thing for last, right? And if that's the books, save the books for last. There's no point ruining the movie or ruining the musical by having a whole bunch of expectations created by the book. Now, there are a few times when it doesn't work quite that way. There are some books that are actually a bit disappointing after the adaptation. For example, when I read Stardust after the movie, I ended up liking the movie a lot more than the book. Sorry, Neil Gaiman. And same for Howl's Moving Castle. I loved the movie, of course. It's a masterpiece. Well, it's good anyway. But the story I was really interested in was that overarching story they hinted at near the end, where there was this war between the kingdoms and they were recruiting magic wielders and having this war of witches, and it just suddenly turned the conflict that we'd been in into small fry and the villain into a bit player, and there was this much bigger thing going on that they never did anything with. And it was so frustrating to me to have this story suddenly start expanding and unfolding into this huge saga, and then they never did anything with it. So I thought, surely Howl's Moving Castle will expand on that and we'll get to learn all about this extra story that wasn't done properly in the movie. And little did I know that story wasn't even in the books. They made it up for the movie, only to present it to us in a very half-baked form. So it doesn't always go the way you want it to. There are rare occasions where the book and the movie are just as good as each other, and all three examples I can think of are ones in which the script was written by the author of the source material. And those are Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, William Goldman's The Princess Bride, and Fanny Flagg's Fried Green Tomatoes. However, back to Wicked. I'm sorry, I'm very good at digressing and going down rabbit holes. Should you read it first? No, don't read it first. If you haven't seen the musical, if you don't know anything about it, just make sure you know The Wizard of Oz. It does pay to have a base in that foundation. That makes sense. It does pay to have the foundation of knowing The Wizard of Oz. But aside from that, I would wait to read the book afterwards. You're much more likely to be satisfied that way. However, as many of us know, the movie of Wicked is only part one of the musical. So, don't spoil everything first. Now, something I would like to discuss now is whether or not Ariana Grande can fix a problem that has been in existence since 1939. No pressure, Ariana. But I call this the assassination of Glinda, because her character has been dragged. Those of you who know the books will know that Glinda is an incredibly powerful character. She's someone you don't mess with. She's an extremely powerful enchantress. She's a woman of great dignity. She commands a huge amount of respect, and you mess with her to your peril. However, the 1939 movie turned her into this ditzy, bubbly, strawberry blonde coming down in a bubble wearing pink. Oh, it really bugs me. There were 3 changes introduced to Oz through the 1939 movie, 3 particularly prominent changes that all have to do with colour. Because in the books, Dorothy is wearing silver shoes and not ruby slippers, they wanted to make that a bit more appealing for the Technicolor, so they gave her ruby slippers instead of just boring silver shoes. And that was a great call. However, that then conflicted with Glinda. In the books, Glinda does not wear bubblegum pink. She wears red. Her colour is red. And in case you haven't picked up on the very minstrel symbolism of that, I suggest you read in between the lines as much as you can, because not only does she wear red, but she lives in a castle made of ruby, and she is surrounded by a retinue of only the most beautiful women in Oz. Now, I know this is an innocent children's book, but I think that's exactly what it sounds like. She lives in a castle of ruby, surrounded by the most beautiful women she can find. It's as sapphic as it gets, and I love it. It was way ahead of its time. However, that hasn't exactly been portrayed. And ever since the 1939 movie, we've had this bubblegum ditzy Glinda, with one main exception in The Emerald City. Natasha Richardson played a fantastic Glinda who was scary and menacing, and I like that. Not in general, but for the character of Glinda. But again, she was wearing white. They couldn't have her wearing red. They gave that colour to the Wicked Witch of the West for some reason, which really messes up the colour scheme in the world of Oz, and Oz fans will know that the colour scheme's important. Anyway, that's another rabbit hole I have to pull out of. Back to Glinda. She was doomed to be this sort of ditzy, don't really know what's going on, are you a good witch or a bad witch kind of person, when really she's a person who you should be fearing. That's right, I was talking about the colours. So the 3 colour things that were changed. Silver shoes were changed to ruby slippers, and as a result, Glinda's red was turned to pink. And the Wicked Witch of the West was changed from a, flesh-toned woman with an eye patch to a green-skinned woman, which was such a strong image that it has retained in the depiction of storybook witches for a very long time. You see it in Disney cartoons and all sorts of storybook adaptations, witches with green skin. I think that was originated in The Wizard of Oz. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. So, poor Glinda, her character's been assassinated, her power's been stripped away from her. Of course, you can't let a good woman be powerful. She has to be demure and submissive. And I have wanted Glinda to break free from this for a long time. The Glinda that is depicted in Wicked the book is alluring. She's charming, she's a bit aloof, she's snobby, she has some power, she's an interesting character, she's complex. The musical brought out the comedy of it, and that was great. Kristen Chenoweth portrayed Glinda as a bit of a cross between Elle from Legally Blonde and Cher from Clueless, it was a fantastic blend. However, when it crossed the pond and moved from Broadway to the West End in London, and Idina Menzel started that, I went to see her, and that was fantastic. When they did that, the character of Glinda was corrupted yet again by this pantomime tradition in the UK. And as many of you may know, British pantomime has these characters that are very, very kind of drag inspired, very silly, very... let's just say Glinda was transformed from Elle meets Cher into Elle meets Miss Piggy. And she became this graceless character who would snort and prance her way across the screen. She became comic relief. And it made me really sad to see this powerful enchantress be dragged down into comic relief like Miss Piggy. No hate on Miss Piggy. I love the Muppets. But I don't want Glinda to be acting like Miss Piggy unless it is a Muppets adaptation of Oz. That is the appropriate time and place. So, the problem with Glinda is that she never gets to be powerful. Even Michelle Williams' performance of Glinda in that woeful, disappointing Oz the Great and Powerful, don't know why they thought James Franco could be the Wizard of Oz. Even there, Michelle Williams was constrained by this need to play the good, demure Glinda who doesn't ruffle feathers and doesn't frighten people, but I think Glinda can afford to frighten people a little bit. And this is the question. Can Ariana Grande heal the character of Glinda? Can she restore the grace and the poise and the dignity and the regality that Glinda the Good should have? I believe she can. It looks really, really promising. So Ariana, I know that Cynthia can do it, but there's a lot riding on the character of Glinda for me. I really want to see Glinda restored to some of her former glory. So I think that's about it from me tonight. Do book your tickets for Wicked. Do read the book of Wicked afterwards so that you don't disappoint yourself. And let me know in the comments, what's your history with the show? When did you first see it? Have you seen it on Broadway? Have you read the book? I hope you'll join me next time in the House of Overthinking, and please do like the video and subscribe to help support the channel. Good night.